Well, good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 167 of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where no sign of age is upon us.
Speak for yourself.
And there goes the Pinocchio nose.
No, lest anyone confuse us with elven royalty.
Nobody's going to do that.
There are many signs of age upon us. But folks, go ahead and pull up a bench in the common room, and we'll be right there. I'm Sean Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the man of the West, who I'm fairly sure is not accounted the wisest of the anything.
Oh.
Alan Sisto.
Wow. Well, apparently now you all know I let Sean finally write one of the opening gags. That won't happen again.
It'll be the last time, I'm sure.
You're not kidding.
But hey, folks, we're going to skip the intro segment here today because we've got a very long episode. It's a great one, but it's a long one. So we're going to get right to it.
That's right. In fact, let's go ahead and dive into the book because we love the books here at the Prancing Pony Podcast.
We really do. We bring you other Tolkien stuff from time to time, but at heart, Alan and I are fans of Tolkien's books and books about Tolkien. That's our passion.
And as you know, we read a lot of books in preparation for the show every week. Now, if you'd like to get your hands on a book that we've mentioned, you're going to want to check out the official library page of our website, theprancingponypodcast.com. There we have links to every book we've mentioned on the show.
And there's a lot of other fun stuff on our website, too. Show notes, book links specific to each episode. There's some outtakes up there, Prancing Pony Ponderings, and some other little extras.
That's right.
You'll also find a link to our online storefront at teespring.com/stores/PPP, where you can find shirts, mugs, stickers, and other PPP gear. So be sure to check that out.
Definitely. And now, let's join the company as they climb a tree. A very large tree with stairs and maybe even an elevator. What do you think, Sean?
And another tree right beside it, only slightly lower, so you get the little two-level effect with a little path running down the middle.
Oh, no, that's brilliant. I like that one a lot. All right. Well, as we usually do in these chapters, we're going to start at, say it with me, folks, the very beginning, because it is
a very good place to start.
I'm going to read the first few paragraphs. The sun was sinking behind the mountains, and the shadows were deepening in the woods when they went on again. Their paths now went into thickets where the dusk had already gathered. Night came beneath the trees as they walked, and the elves uncovered their silver lamps. Suddenly they came out into the open again, and found themselves under a pale evening sky, pricked by a few early stars. There was a wide treeless space before them, running in a great circle, and bending away on either hand. Beyond it was a deep fosse, lost in soft shadow, but the grass upon its brink was green, as if it glowed still in the memory of the sun that had gone. Upon the further side there rose to a great height a green wall encircling a green hill, thronged with malorn trees taller than any they had yet seen in all the land. Their height could not be guessed, but they stood up in the twilight like living towers. In their many-tiered branches, and amid their ever-moving leaves, countless lights were gleaming, green and gold and silver. Haldir turned towards the company. "Welcome to Caras Galadhon," he said. "Here is the city of the Galadhrim, where dwell the Lord Celeborn and Galadriel, the Lady of Lothlórien. But we cannot enter here, for the gates do not look northward. We must go round to the southern side, and the way is not short, for the city is great."
Very cool.
I say we dive in.
Okay, so we see that the sun is sinking behind the mountains at the very beginning of the chapter here. And remember that late in the last chapter, we saw the sun of afternoon when the blindfolds were removed. So some time has passed.
That's
even
right,
since that moment just a few pages ago.
Right.
And the paths must have taken a while because once they're in the open, it is now pale evening with some stars, so it's even still later.
Sure.
And of course, I have to point this out again because I always have to point this out. Wherever there are elves, you're going to see stars.
That's a very good point. Yeah. Now, we get this really interesting landscape description. First, we get a word that I want to touch on, fosse. Now, the first time I came across this, I didn't really know what it was, so I did have to look it up. Thankfully, these days in ebooks, you just double-click a word and boom, there it is. It's a long, narrow trench, especially in a fortification. So imagine it sort of like a smaller moat without any water. It's a defensive landscape feature. So that's the first thing to picture there. And on the other side of this trench, then, you now have a green wall that encircles the green hill. So it's a pretty amazing sight.
So this is a fosse, not a fosse. It's not like Bob Fosse.
No, it's not jazz hands. No, this isn't choreography. Do you want to sing choreography from White Christmas?
I don't.
No? Good,
No, I
'cause I won't let
don't,
you.
but I can't see that word without thinking of Bob Fosse. So
I know.
just
I
have to-
can't either. I can't either.
I
And
keep wanting to mispronounce it for that.
I know. I do too.
So I'm glad you set me straight on that, because I think
I
I'm
did.
reading that word later on.
Yeah, I think you might be. So now that we understand that this is a long trench and not a choreographer laying in front of the city of the, of the Galadhrim.
Tra-la-la-lally would go very well with jazz hands. I'm just,
That's true.
You could do a whole
That's true.
dance routine. I think it would work. But
I think I'd have to walk away. But yeah.
Oh, I think it would be enjoyable once.
Okay. Well,
Maybe-
you have a
maybe
higher
not
threshold
twice.
than I do. No.
Maybe not
All right.
twice. Anyway.
So again, this beautiful scene. We've got the trench and sort of the way the wall, the top of it glows with that setting sun, and then you get the green wall around the green hill. So it's a pretty amazing. Lots of green, lots and lots of green. The grass upon the brink is green. Then there's the green wall. Then there's the green hill, and then there's green lights amongst the gold and silver lights in the branches of the trees. And these aren't just any ordinary Malorn trees. These are taller than any of the ones they've seen before. So these are huge.
Yeah. Height could not be guessed.
I know.
Like living towers. I mean, these things.
Like skyscrapers.
These are huge. Yeah.
Yeah. This is like
They're really-
downtown.
They really are. And you see that when Haldir welcomes them, and he actually calls it the city of the Galadhrim. This is not
an encampment.
The magic treehouse, the treetop settlement of the Galadhrim. This is a city.
That's right. And a big one. It's so big that it's going to take us a while to get to where the gates are.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Because there is only one set of gates that face southward.
That's right.
Actually, I think it's more southwest, as we're going to see in a little bit.
Yeah, we will.
And so they're coming at the city from the north, and it's very telling that it's going to take them a while to get around it.
Yeah, it is.
Don't imagine just a little clump of trees. This is a big place.
No, this is indeed. I also wanted to give you a little bit of word nerdery on the name. Now, I know, word nerdery coming from me. I just every once in a while I have to remind you all that I can still do that, because I typically defer to Sean, but not this time.
You do fine when you
I know.
step into those waters. You do quite well.
I know, but I just wanted to make sure that I'm not stepping on your toes here, man.
No, not at all.
Now, I don't think we touched on this last chapter when we first introduced the Galadhrim themselves, but until the second printing of the second edition in 1967, this was Caras Galadhon, just the hard D, and the elves here were the Galadrim, no H, no soft sound. Now, in Unfinished Tales, Christopher Tolkien explains, my father originally altered the voiced form of TH, as in modern English then, in Elvish names to D, since, as he wrote, DH is not used in English and looks uncouth. Afterwards, he changed his mind on the point, but Galadrim and Caras Galadhon remained uncorrected until after the appearance of the revised edition of The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, and the meaning is something like City of the Trees, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of that note in the Sylvan Elves and their speech, which is in Appendix A of the History of Galadriel and Celeborn from Unfinished Tales.
Right.
In that, we're told that Caras seems to be an old word for a moated fortress in the Sylvan speech, so that's one of the 30 words that Nimmerdale knew, I guess.
Nicely done. Yeah.
And it's not found in Sindarin.
Right.
Now, the word Galadhon is related to Galadhrim. I think you could probably tell that. And Galadhrim means the tree people. So Galadhon means something like of the trees, city of the trees. And by the way, neither one of these words, Galadhon or Galadhrim, neither one of those words is related to Galadriel's name, as we're going to be discussing shortly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention this reference anymore, but in Parma Eldalamber number 17, we're told that...
I'm going to need a sound effect for that one, Sean.
Man, that if you can get your hands on that, it is such a great word nerd reference for all of Lord of the Rings.
I know. I do need to get a copy of that one.
It's very hard. It's very hard to track down because it's out of print.
Mm.
But anyway, in it, we are told that the original hard D versions of Galadrim and Galadhon were Sylvan dialectal forms that Tolkien later replaced with proper Sindarin DH forms. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So let's table that for now.
Good. I appreciate that. In fact, I'm going to have you pick up right after that, though, when they enter Caras Galadhon. By the way, isn't it hard? I find it so hard to say Galadhon and Galadrim when we're going through that word nerdery.
I know.
I keep wanting to say it correctly.
Galadhon.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the funny thing about Tolkien not liking the DH, because to me, that's like, it's such a feature in Sindarin that when I see that DH, it just looks so elvish to me that I can't imagine it any other way.
I know, but that's because we've been exposed to it for such a long time. And
That's true.
I'm sure at the time Tolkien was a little, I don't know, concerned that, like he said, it just wouldn't come across right. How did Christopher say he described it? As uncouth? Because it's not used in English. So, yeah.
And I'm sure the first time I read Lord of the Rings, I just pronounced it like a D, not
oh, I'm sure I did.
With it, you know?
I'm sure I did. Probably like Galadhrim. Galadhon.
Yeah, something really, really... Talk about uncouth, right? Yeah.
Well, I pronounce a lot of uncouth things, so we'll just leave it at that.
Not anymore.
No, that's true.
At this point in your Tolkien fandom career.
Tanny Quettle, I no longer say that. That's a good
There's
thing.
one or two, but that's all right.
All right. Let's get into the city itself, shall we, Sean?
Let's do that. There was a road paved with white stone running on the outer brink of the foss. Along this they went westward, with the city ever climbing up like a green cloud upon their left. And as the night deepened, more lights sprang forth, until all the hill seemed afire with stars. They came at last to a white bridge, and crossing found the great gates of the city. They faced southwest, set between the ends of the encircling wall that here overlapped, and they were tall and strong, and hung with many lamps. Haldir knocked and spoke, and the gates opened soundlessly. But of guards Frodo could see no sign. The travelers passed within, and the gates shut behind them. They were in a deep lane between the ends of the wall, and passing quickly through it they entered the city of the trees. No folk could they see, nor hear any feet upon the paths, but there were many voices about them and in the air above. Far away up on the hill they could hear the sound of singing falling from on high, like soft rain upon leaves.
And not, I will note, like tra-la-la-lally. I just want to be real clear about that.
And no jazz hands, despite
despite
the
not.
outer brink of the foss.
Foss, just want to make sure. All right. So let's take a look at this road to the gates. It's a road that runs right alongside the trench. It's paved with white stone.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the city's to their left, so that means, since they're going north to south, that they are going around the west side of the city. And then night deepens, and wow, the hill becomes afire with stars. What a scene that is, right?
Yeah.
Oh.
I almost want to say, like, look, there's stars again, but these aren't real stars, of course. These are just figurative stars. But still,
right.
Just comparing anything to stars, it just feels like a very elvish thing to do. So
it does indeed. Then you get the stunning white bridge, and then the gates themselves, these tall, amazing, I don't know. I'm picturing them. They're beautiful. The idea with all these lamps all over the place. You know, this is a pretty strong place. This is a place that's built for defense, even though you don't think about that from a military standpoint. This city is defended very well. One set of gates. You've got the foss. You've got the wall surrounding it. And, of course, it's deep, deep, deep in the kingdom where it would take a long time for an opposing force to get to it.
Mm-hmm. And I thought it was very interesting that the way that they're situated, so they're set between the two ends of the wall. So basically, the wall is looping around, but it's not a perfect closed circle, is it?
No.
The two ends of the wall are sort of overlapping a little bit, almost like it's going to spiral outward. But it stops, and that's where the gates are. So the gates are, when you see them go through this lane, they are actually going through going between the two ends of the wall, the two ends of the circle.
So if you're picturing it, the wall on the left of the door is going north, and the wall to the right is coming kind of towards you, and then moves to your right towards the south. So yeah, I mean, it's not like you'd imagine a normal gate being set in a straight line between two walls that would meet.
The gate is not parallel to the circumference of the circle. It's
right. That's a good way to put it.
It's set against it, and it's almost like you can imagine almost it's almost like a spirograph circle that's going to start to spiral out, but it doesn't. It just stops right there, and that's where the gates are. Yeah. It's a really, really interesting design. It took me several reads to really grasp what's going on there.
Yeah.
Well, and then when the gates open, they open soundlessly. There are no guards that can be seen.
I know. How cool is that?
But you know they're there.
Oh, yeah. You know they're there. Absolutely they're there. Yeah.
Yep. And then they go through the wall of trees and into the city. Mm-hmm. There's no one visible on the paths, but they hear these voices above singing. And this amazing description of just the voices like soft rain upon leaves. I love that.
I love that phrase. That is such a phrase, like soft rain upon leaves. I don't have enough of that in my life. I need more singing like soft rain upon leaves.
And less actual rain upon leaves, huh?
Yeah, actually, it having been raining here for the last 48 plus hours nonstop, just about.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a beautiful image. And it's one of those things that, again, this has just been described as a city. And yet, of course, the Galadhrim are not going to do a city like anybody else. We're going to see this very, obviously, the towers themselves are organic. They're trees. The wall, even the walls are going to take on sort of an organic, again, when I'm thinking about this circle shape of the walls, I'm thinking of something that's kind of organic. It doesn't look totally
it's not going to be a
built, although
perfect
it is
circle,
built.
right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so you just see these very organic shapes and a very natural approach to city planning, although I hate to say it that way, but that's...
I'm trying to imagine the elven version of Sim City. Zoning for residential and commercial and industrial.
Yeah.
No industrial here, though. All right.
No industrial. All nature here.
That's right. In the section that we aren't reading here immediately after, we actually finally get to see the Noldoran treehouse, right? It's quite a ways into town. Just as the city itself is deep into the forest, the place where Celeborn and Galadriel live, of course, is quite a ways into town. They had to take many paths and many stairs to get there. And they're at the top of the hill now. They're to the high places in the town. And the description, oh my goodness, the wide lawn, the shimmering fountain, the silver lamps, and the basin of silver. This is just gorgeous, and it's so vivid. But boy, this tree is the thing that grabs your attention, isn't it? The smooth bole, the gray silk, just massive. And its first branches don't open until far, far above. And it's almost like the sky itself. The leaves are like shadowy clouds. This is unbelievably large tree.
Pretty high up. Yeah, it's unbelievably high up.
Yeah. Beyond, I think, what most of us could imagine.
Yeah.
And it's only guarded by 3 elves.
Apparently, that's all they need.
Maybe. I don't know. I wouldn't want to test these guys, that's for sure.
No, I'm sure they're elite warriors.
Yeah.
They're not going to let any golems slip past them.
No. And if they did, maybe they would shoot him, Legolas.
Right. Or Haldir, for that matter.
Yeah, seriously. You could have done something, but no, that's all right.
But now it's time to go up. You got a meeting with the Lord and Lady upstairs. And,
they got to decide what to do with you.
Haldir says the Lord and Lady would like to talk to you.
That's not a request.
It's not a request.
Is a command.
Just to be clear, this is not a request.
It's an invitation with air quotes. Yeah.
Yeah. There's only one way you can RSVP to this one. It is their wish that you should go up there. I thought this was neat. So obviously Haldir's going to go first, right? He's the warden. But then Frodo comes after him, and then Legolas. Okay, you expect Legolas to go in the front, but the fact that Frodo goes in front of Legolas, who is, let's face it, distant kin of these elves,
right.
The fact that Frodo gets this position of honor, and not maybe Aragorn, who has rewards points in this particular hotel.
That is true. I mean, Galadriel does know him.
Yeah. So I mean, this tells us right here that they know all about Frodo and his errand.
It does,
and we've been told that already, but again, you see that they understand what's going on here.
Yeah.
And of course, we're going to see that when we actually meet Galadriel and Celeborn in just a moment.
Yes, we will.
Now, let's talk about this last line before your reading, because Haldir says that it's a long climb for those that are not accustomed to such stairs. But 2 paragraphs before, we saw a broad white ladder. So what is it? Is it a ladder or is it stairs?
Oh, that's a very good point. I mean, I suppose you could still call the steps of a ladder stairs, maybe? Do stairs, by definition, also have to have a horizontal element to them, or can they be purely vertical?
I don't know.
I mean, definition-wise, it's just a set of steps leading from one floor to another, so in theory...
When I see a broad white ladder, I'm imagining it being a ladder. But then Haldir says, not accustomed to such stairs. I kind of think that is more of a metaphor. People like you might be used to stairs. Well, these are our stairs, and it's just a ladder, and you might not be used to that.
Point.
I kind of think that's what's going on there, but I
don't know.
It might
be a very steep staircase. I mean, like almost like a ladder, like an A-frame ladder. So you do have, big elevation changes between each step, but they do move forward as well. I don't know.
Could be.
I mean, that would still be a white ladder.
Yeah, that's true. It could be that. That could be it.
And how would you rest if there was no horizontal progress as well? I mean, if it was a strictly straight up climb, I don't know. I guess you could have shelves, flets to rest. I don't know. That's a very good question. I'm just glad it's not rope bridges. And so is Sam.
There is that, yeah. But, it's funny because I think the first few times I read this, I always imagined ladders. And then Peter Jackson's movie came out, and there's the beautiful shot of them climbing up this gorgeous spiral staircase.
Oh, it is gorgeous.
And I love that shot. Mm-hmm. But then when I go back to the book, it does seem like it's more of a ladder. So I don't know.
Maybe it's a broad white ladder to the landing, and from there it's stairs.
Could be. I kind of like your idea that it's a very steep staircase that is almost like a ladder.
Yeah. Makes me think a little bit of the stairs of Cirith Ungol, that are super, super steep.
Yeah.
That are more vertical than horizontal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Could be. I mean, totally different environment, totally different feel.
That's true.
Mean in terms of just the nature of the stairs.
A little less slimy here.
Yeah, a little less leading to someplace hellish. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm with you. At least it's not rope bridges, and at least it's not, walking a rope.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. No. All right.
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and pick up right after that as Frodo climbs the tree. As he climbed slowly up, Frodo passed many flets, some on one side, some on another, and some set about the bole of the tree, so that the ladder passed through them. At a great height above the ground, he came to a wide talon, like the deck of a great ship. On it was built a house, so large that almost it would have served for a hall of men upon the earth. He entered behind Haldir, and found that he was in a chamber of oval shape, in the midst of which grew the trunk of the great Malhorn, now tapering towards its crown, and yet making still a pillar of wide girth. The chamber was filled with a soft light. Its walls were green and silver, and its roof of gold. Many elves were seated there. On 2 chairs beneath the bole of the tree, and canopied by a living bough, there sat, side by side, Celeborn and Galadriel. They stood up to greet their guests, after the manner of elves, even those who were accounted mighty kings. Very tall they were, and the lady no less tall than the lord, and they were grave and beautiful. They were clad wholly in white, and the hair of the lady was of deep gold, and the hair of the Lord Celeborn was of silver, long and bright. But no sign of age was upon them, unless it were in the depths of their eyes, for these were keen as lances in the starlight, and yet profound, the wells of deep memory.
Once again, no sign of age is upon them. I feel like this is exactly the opposite of me, because there are many signs of age upon me, and I'm not sure that I have that keenness in my eyes that I wish I had.
They definitely look like the wells of deep memory. Maybe not the wells, maybe the bags of deep memory.
Mine are kind of like the wells of cloudy memories of things that,
there you go.
All the stuff I
floaters.
Well said.
Oh, goodness. So Frodo's going up the ladder, stairs, whatever they may be, and he's passing flets. 2 things come to mind. First is Gollum.
1 left, 2 right, 3 left. No, go back, precious, go back. Must go back.
Exactly. But the other is just like, here a flet, there a flet, everywhere a flet. As Frodo's climbing up the tree, there's flets everywhere.
Old McCeleborn had a treehouse.
There's a massive number of flets.
Yeah.
It's a flet fest. It's a flet fest.
Would you say I have a plethora of flets?
Yes, I would. Yes, I would.
And then they come to this one particular flet or talon, so big it's like the main deck of a ship.
Yeah.
And it's got a large house on it.
It's huge. This is a massive talon if it's big enough to have a large house on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of this house,
I just can't help thinking of huge tracts of land.
Huge tracts of land. Well, Galadriel might have huge tracts of land, but you're not going to be able to marry her.
No.
Herbert.
Yeah.
Herbert. All right.
What's wrong with her? She's beautiful. She's rich. All right. She is both of those things. She is both of those things. She is beautiful and rich.
Yeah, she's not going to marry Herbert. That's for sure. All right. Well, speaking of this house and of the elves of Lothlórien living in the trees, I want to go back to Unfinished Tales for a little bit more information. Christopher Tolkien explains the custom of dwelling in trees was not a habit of the Sylvan elves in general, but was developed in Lórien by the nature and situation of the land, a flat land with no good stone, except what might be quarried in the mountains westward, and brought with difficulty down the Silverlode. Its chief wealth was in its trees, a remnant of the great forests of the elder days. But the dwelling in trees was not universal even in Lórien, and the Teline, or flets, were in origin either refuges to be used in the event of attack, or, most often, especially those high up in great trees, outlook posts from which the land and its borders could be surveyed by elvish eyes.
And Tolkien himself points out that such an outlook post, used by the wardens of the North Marches, was the flet in which Frodo spent the night. The abode of Celeborn and Caras Galadhon was also of the same origin. Its highest flet, which the Fellowship of the Ring did not see, was the highest point in the land. Earlier, the flet of Amroth at the top of the great mound or hill of Carin Amroth, piled by the labor of many hands, had been the highest, and was principally designed to watch Dol Guldur across the Anduin. The conversion of these Teline into permanent dwellings was a later development, and only in Caras Galadhon were such dwellings numerous. But Caras Galadhon was itself a fortress, and only a small part of the Galadhrim dwelt within its walls. So, first of all, I guess I have to point out, yes, we just saw a moment ago that Caras actually does mean fortress, so it certainly was a
there
fortress.
it is.
That's why it's called that as opposed to something else. But yeah, that just really underscores the fact that this is a special thing that they're living in this giant Talon. Not
they
all
don't
of the
all
elves
live.
of Lórien. Right. Not all of the
Exactly.
elves of Lórien live in trees, not by any stretch of the imagination.
No.
It seems like most of the Galadhrim don't even live in the city of Caras Galadhon itself.
No, they all live in the suburbs and take the buses to work.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, sorry. It's interesting because obviously the first part that I was reading from Christopher Tolkien's passage there is clearly in a normal situation, they would be building stone buildings. They wouldn't be living in the trees. They're just no good stone here. And the only stone nearby is the stuff in the mountains. It would take, a great deal of effort to bring it down the Silverlode. So instead, they find a way to live in the trees themselves, but only some of them. So they must have still brought down and built actual stone buildings.
Yeah, they must have.
Yeah, so you've
Just
got
not
the
much
ones
of
that
it,
are watchtowers, so to speak,
Mhm.
that may be refuges in case there is an attack. But then, of course, you have this where the Lord and Lady dwell.
Yep.
So let's take a look at the hall itself. We've got a large oval-shaped chamber, and it is big. It is a big place. We've got many elves in it, right? So there's plenty of space for, I suppose, the court, if you will, of the Lady and the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
The trunk is already near its crown now, but it's still a pretty big pillar. So we know that this tree still has some height to go, and that's something that you just read, that there actually is a flet even higher that serves sort of as almost like a crow's nest, if you will, the highest point in this massive city.
And let's point out that the trunk actually goes through the middle of the room.
Yeah.
It is a pillar in the middle of the room, which is such a wonderful mythological image. There's actually a couple of different myths. There's a couple. I think it's there's one in Norse myth, and then there's one in Greek myth from the Odyssey of like these houses that have a tree just growing right through the middle of them. I might have to pull those up for the postscript. But
that would be worth looking into for sure.
Yeah. I think it was it's in the Volsung saga, which is the story of Sigurd. So we know we knew that one well.
And I know it sounded vaguely familiar, but it's been so long. So, yeah. So we get the soft light, right? We get the walls of green and silver and the golden roof. This is a beautiful place and a kind of a visually intimidating place, as you'd expect it to be. It's essentially the throne room, so it should be pretty impressive.
It should be impressive. And so here we are in the throne room, and who do we see on the throne? We see the Lord and Lady themselves, Celeborn and Galadriel. And we see them stand to greet their guests, which we're told is the traditional manner of elven kings.
Yeah.
And I love that detail.
I do too.
Because it speaks to a humility and I think an openness, with their guests.
And that's not something I normally would expect from the elves, to be honest. I mean, there's sort of an aloofness, a superiority. I mean, the men are the aftercomers, the dwarves are the stunted people. So it is interesting to see that even with that sort of haughtiness that I'm not saying is inappropriate, right? I mean, these are surely longeval.
I think despite all of our jokes about the words they use to describe other races, which okay, is pretty strong evidence in favor
was
of the
gonna
haughty
say.
argument.
Yeah.
I don't think that we see haughtiness from most elves. I think there's a lot
as
of
a
elves
whole,
that,
you're right.
yeah, despite some of the things they call us. But there are a few, and when they're haughty, they're certainly very haughty. But I think
Yes, they are.
there's a lot of elves who show that kind of humility, and
I agree.
especially Celeborn and Galadriel, and I just love that.
Oh, definitely. I do too.
I love that even here, even now, Celeborn and Galadriel are not a lord and lady who are going to look down on people.
No.
Except literally, because
Well,
they are both immensely tall.
Ding, ding, ding. That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah, they are very tall. And in fact, let's get into that a little bit. So are we going to go back to Unfinished Tales? Why, yes. Yes,
Why
we
not?
are. It's not a surprise, given how much information there is to mine from the history of Galadriel and Celeborn. But not this time. Believe it or not, this is going to come from an appendix to the Disaster of the Gladden Fields. Now, this appendix is on, brace yourselves for the excitement, folks, Númenórean linear measures. That's right. Something you've always wanted to know.
As much as we wish Tolkien would have written about, like,
I know.
did Balrogs have wings? Or what is Tom Bombadil? Or, I don't know, the Noldorin line of succession.
Right. Where did the Entwives go? I don't know.
Where did the Entwives go? There's so many things, so many of those, like, really nerdy fantasy details that we wish he would have talked about. And he didn't, but he talked about Númenórean linear measures, man.
Yes, he did.
I love it.
And
it's great.
It is great. He talks about the ranga, or the plural of that would be rangar, which was a measurement much like our yard of 36 inches, though it was 38 inches because, well, they were taller. Anyway, what does the ranga have to do with Galadriel and Celeborn?
Of course.
Well, I'm glad you asked, Sean. Didn't you ask? Yes, you did.
I did. I totally, of course, yeah.
That's right. You want to add that in? No, I'm just kidding.
Sure,
in the
why not?
appendix, we read that the Eldar of the Elder Days were also very tall. Galadriel, the tallest of all the women of the Eldar of whom tales tell, was said to be man-high, but it is noted according to the measure of the Dunedain and the men of old, indicating a height of about 6'4", and that Celeborn, who was originally of the Teleri, was held by them to be tall, as his name indicated, silver tall, but the Teleri were in general somewhat less in build and stature than the Noldor.
Now, that man-high definition of 6'4" was, according to Tolkien, from a later date, when the stature of the Dunedain appears to have decreased, Tolkien said. In fact, Tolkien says that Elendil was said to be more than man-high by nearly half a ranga.
Wow.
I know, but he was accounted, and I guess that's why he's called Elendil the Tall.
Yeah, apparently so.
But he was accounted the tallest of all the Númenóreans who escaped the downfall. So nearly half a ranga taller than 6'4" means that Elendil must have been close to 7'10".
Wow.
Let's just let that sink in for a moment.
Shaquille O'Neal is 7'1".
Yeah.
7'1", and
Yeah.
Elendil was 7'10".
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So now what does that have to do with Galadriel and Celeborn? Not a darn thing, really, but man,
Nothing at all.
7'10"?
Yeah.
We had to get that in there.
Yeah, we did. Man. I think he must play center in the pickup basketball league there.
I don't think anybody plays with him.
No, I mean, he just stands in front of the hoop.
Can
I mean,
you
really.
imagine Elendil just like looking for a pickup game? Like, hey guys, you want to shoot some hoops? No, sorry.
No, thank you, sir.
We got a thing. I'm sorry, we've got to go to the temple.
Yeah, that's right. I know there are human sacrifices going on and all, but I'm still going there because
I'd rather be there than lose a game to Elendil, man.
Who must have palmed the ball like you and I would hold a tennis ball? I mean, 7'10".
Just imagining the hands. Yeah. Oh, man.
Yeah. And the size of that sword. I mean, now you really start to imagine the size of the sword that Aragorn's carrying. They must have reforged it a little more normally sized, because a sword for a man who's 7'10" tall needs to be made a little bigger than a man who's maybe, what did we figure out Aragorn was? Somewhere around 6'5", 6'6",
Yeah,
maybe?
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, maybe it was a short sword for Elendil.
Yeah, it's true. And now it's a long sword or even a bastard sword or something like that for Aragorn. Yeah. Interesting. Anyway, we did have to talk about that because 7'10", man.
7'10". It's a little extreme. I mean,
It's
about
mind-boggling. Yeah.
talk about Eld Enta Yowerk. I mean, little did you know that the giants in question were actually Elendil.
Númenóreans, right?
Yeah.
So coming back to Celeborn and Galadriel, who we're actually here to see, they're grave and beautiful. They're all in white. This is a really stunning scene. And then we get that hair description. We get Galadriel's hair gold, deep gold. And Celeborn's hair is this silver, long and bright, which frankly, and we know this, right? It echoes the leaves of the Melern. Silver underneath turning to gold, didn't it?
Yep. But it also echoes the original two trees, the two trees of Valinor.
Does.
And we talked about this in episode 165. And we see, again, that silver and gold color scheme that runs all throughout, and how Galadriel really was trying to evoke the Elder Days with that. But I think it's also very interesting that the silver and gold theme also echoes in their names. So let's talk a little word nerdery about their names here.
Okay.
Celeborn means either silver tree or silver tall, like you said just a moment ago. I think Tolkien kind of went back and forth on that second element, but the first part is definitely Celeb, which means silver.
Right.
And I think we discussed that long ago in season 1, that, he came from a long line of people who were all named after trees, right?
Right.
There was Celeborn, there was Nimloth, there's all kinds of them. Then we get Galadriel. Galadriel means maiden crowned with radiant garland. And that was a reference to her.
Galadriel is a lot easier to say than maiden crowned with radiant garland.
With radiant garland. Yeah.
Hello, maiden crowned with radiant garland. May I have a piece of your hair?
Just call me May,
Maiden, yeah.
But no, this was a reference to her golden hair. That was the radiant garland that's spoken of. In fact, the primitive Elvish root Kal, which became Gal in her name, that actually means light. And that's the same root you see in things like Calaquendi and Gil-galad.
Right.
But sometimes it does have a very specific connotation of shine golden, or of like firelight.
Okay.
So there is kind of a gold connotation with her name as well, even though it's not quite as explicit as Celeborn's.
Okay.
Being silver. Now, remember the conversation we had just a few minutes ago about Caras Galadhon and that old form Galadon?
Right.
Well, as I said earlier, don't get confused about the etymology of Galadriel's name and confuse it with, the same tree word that's in those words. Even though Tolkien himself went back and forth on the spelling of Galadhon, did it with a D, did it with a DH, and he even contradicts himself in his own notes because he's Tolkien. He's constantly changing his mind. But the final decision about the etymology was that the root of those words, Galadhon and Galadrim, those words actually were from Galath with a DH, which is tree in Sindarin, not from Galad with a hard D, which is light.
Okay.
Going back to Parma Eldalamberon 17, and I think it might be the last time this episode, Tolkien actually acknowledged the awkward competition between these two words. That was his phrase, awkward competition between Galath, tree, and Galad, light. He said they sound so similar, but he said the two words would only be confused by strangers to Lothlórien.
It's sort of like 2, 2, and 2 in English language, or there and there.
Yeah, I guess so. And I guess you're right. And it's the kind of thing that if you are not a native speaker, it's going to mystify you. But I guess if you know the language and you understand it, then you get it straight, I guess. Yeah. And I think that's what he means when he says it would only be confused by strangers. So
right.
But anyway, we talked about, no sign of age on their faces, but these deep eyes that they have, and how much we wish we had those eyes.
Deep memory. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind keen as lances, but profound. Yeah. So I missed something somewhere. But now that we've actually seen Galadriel, I want to take a minute to look at a possible inspiration for the character. After all, the character of Galadriel, in fact, honestly, the whole of Lothlórien, was something that came to Tolkien late in the process. In a 1955 letter that he wrote to W.H. Auden, which is number 163 in Carpenter's collection, Tolkien talks about how the things that he encountered in writing The Lord of the Rings astonished him. Now, I know we've touched on this before, but it's worth looking at again. He says things like, I had never been to Bree. Strider sitting in the corner at the inn was a shock, and I had no more idea who he was than had Frodo. The mines of Moria had been a mere name, and of Lothlórien no word had reached my mortal ears till I came there.
And while we don't often like to look too closely at the bones that are in the soup, although I feel like we break that rule every other episode now.
Just about, yeah.
Hammond and Skull put something in front of us that we just had to take a closer look at. They quoted John Ratliff, writing in a Mythlore article, as pointing out the influence of a character by the name of Asha. Now, that's spelled Ayesha. It looks like Aisha, but it is pronounced Asha, according to the author himself. And that author is H. Rider Haggard, and the book we're talking about is She. Now, folks who are familiar with Haggard may know that he also wrote King Solomon's Mines, so you might know him from the Alan Quatermain series, very popular books in the 19th century. She was also a very popular book. It was first printed in 1887, and Ratliff points out some really specific parallels between Asha and Galadriel. He says the most obvious parallel is she herself, Asha, wisdom's daughter, she who must be obeyed. An exceedingly beautiful woman, so beautiful that all who see her remember the sight ever after. She rules a small, isolated, ancient kingdom, the borders of which no one is allowed to pass. Strangers are admitted only if she has sent word beforehand to admit them, and even then they must make part of the journey blindfolded. Beautiful and terrible, worshipful but fearsome, she is not only wise and beautiful, but also immortal. Now, who does that sound like?
Who does that sound like? I don't know, but it intrigues me, the fact that she who must be obeyed, and there also are blindfolds involved. I'm just saying that's a little, yeah.
Well, you know, those Victorians, man.
And another commentator, Steve Lindley, has commented that both Galadriel and, I wanted to say Aisha, but it's Asha, right? So both Galadriel and Asha have a powerful gaze, the effect of which on the recipient being the feeling of being laid bare or psychologically denuded.
And even Tolkien himself, in an interview in 1967, said, I suppose as a boy, she interested me as much as anything.
All right. Well, folks, we love to tie things up here at the Prancing Pony Podcast.
No. Stop.
So we wanted to point out something
We are going to get in trouble.
that we learned when researching this tidbit. You know, we want to bring it full circle. We want to tie it up. That's what we're doing here. Yeah, I'm not saying anything. Scholars have observed there were parallels between Haggard's she and earlier stories. That's right. It's another mention for surprising star of the show, Edward Bulwer-Lytton, whose 1862 work, A Strange Story, included a mysterious woman named Asha, and yet again, The Coming Race, which was about the discovery of that subterranean civilization, because that's what she rules in Haggard's work, an underground subterranean civilization. So
there you go.
Honestly, how could we not mention Bulwer-Lytton again, given the chance, really?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
I think that needs to be our goal. Every chance we get, let's bring up Bulwer-Lytton. And once again, a big hat tip to Hammond and Skull for giving us the Ratliff quote and leading us down the rabbit trail. But, folks, the Bulwer-Lytton stuff was all us. So if that made you think of Bovril again, and I hope it did, please don't hold Hammond and Skull responsible.
No, please don't. Well, next we get Haldir introducing Frodo, and I'm going to have you go ahead and read there.
All right. Haldir led Frodo before them, and the Lord welcomed him in his own tongue. The Lady Galadriel said no word, but looked long upon his face. Sit now beside my chair, Frodo of the Shire, said Celeborn. When all have come, we will speak together. Each of the companions he greeted courteously by name as they entered. Welcome, Aragorn, son of Arathorn, he said. It is 38 years of the world outside since you came to this land, and those years lie heavy on you. But the end is near, for good or ill. Here lay aside your burden for a while. Welcome, son of Thranduil. Too seldom do my kindred journey hither from the north. Welcome, Gimli, son of Glóin. It is long indeed since we saw one of Durin's folk in Caras Galadhon. But today we have broken our long law. May it be a sign that though the world is now dark, better days are at hand, and that friendship shall be renewed between our peoples. Gimli bowed low.
That's an important moment, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
So notice that Celeborn is the one who speaks here, who welcomes them, not Galadriel. I think that's worth noting.
It is worth noting. It is... I know we want to make jokes about Galadriel doing all the talking and, when she allows Celeborn to speak. The truth is, they really are a power couple. This is not...
Oh, yeah.
This is not like, I mean, and honestly, I'm fine with it if Galadriel is the more powerful one, which she definitely is the more powerful of the two. But it's important to respect the unit that's there. They are the Lord and Lady.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of want to put that out there if anybody feels like we're making jokes about, Celeborn being
a trophy king, a trophy husband.
Inferior to his wife. Yeah, being a trophy husband and things like that. Obviously, it's all in jest. I mean, they really are. They really are an amazing couple, and I think we need.
They really are. And Galadriel has some amazing things to say about him as well.
She really does. Yeah, she does. And the fact that she holds him in such high regard should tell us something.
Yes,
so,
it does.
I want to put that out there before we make a whole bunch of jokes about
Celeborn
not speaking again for the rest of the chapter. Yeah,
exactly.
But so he welcomes Aragorn.
Uh-huh.
We learn that it's been a while since he was here. 38 years. So he was, 49 last time he was here?
Yeah.
Because he's 87
so,
now.
Right, because he's 87 now. Right, he'll be 88 later. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Legolas is greeted very briefly.
Indeed,
hey,
very briefly.
You guys haven't been here in a while. Come on in.
Yeah, good to see you. Next.
Make yourself at home. Yeah. Gimli is given a very warm greeting here. And Celeborn actually speaks to a hope for future friendship between elves and dwarves. And this is incredibly significant because remember, we read not long ago, back on Tolkien Reading Day, episode 160, we read that Celeborn had no liking for dwarves of any race. That comes from Unfinished Tales. Mm-hmm. And it says, as he showed to Gimli and Lothlórien. Now, we're going to see that in a moment. But right now, he is greeting him as a friend. And he's hoping that's going to be a sign of renewed friendship in the future.
That's right. And now, apparently, Boromir, Merry, Pippin, and Sam are, I don't know, less important. But the text does say, I know who, but the text says that each of the companions he greeted courteously by name. We just don't happen to see those greetings relayed in the text. Yeah. Another thing we don't see relayed in the text, but still definitely worth mentioning, Sean and I want to introduce you to a new sponsor here at the Prancing Pony Podcast, Mythology Candles.
My wife came across their website recently and knew that we would be a perfect match.
Yeah.
So we reached out, and here they are. Mythology Candles are all about creating a more immersive experience through fantasy-inspired candles.
That's right. Whether you're reading a Tolkien book, playing a tabletop game, or even an RPG, maybe just listening to some great music, Mythology Candles transport you to another realm.
They're handcrafted. They're made with luxurious, eco-friendly coconut wax. They've got crackling wooden wicks and unique custom fragrances. Fragrances like the Ranger, Wizard's Pipeweed, or Breeze Spice Market.
Well, clearly we all share a common inspiration now, don't we?
I think so.
I like the sound of those candles, and I rather suspect I'm going to like the smell of them as well.
I'm with you 100%.
Yeah.
So, folks, check out mythologycandles.com. Now, that's MYTHOLOGIE candles.com, where you become the hero of the story.
And be sure to use the code PrancingPony when you check out, and you'll get a free 2-ounce candle with any purchase. Now, that's mythologycandles.com. It's mythology with an IE at the end. And use the promo code PrancingPony for a free candle.
Now, I don't think they have a Treetops of Lorien scented candle, but that's where we're headed back to as Alan picks up with Celeborn, seeming a little bit miffed about his intelligence gathering.
That's right. When all the guests were seated before his chair, the Lord looked at them again. And this is so hard to not ape the film version because it's like his only line.
I know.
Here there are 8, 9 were to... Yeah, no. Here there are 8, he said. 9 were to set out, so said the messengers. But maybe there has been some change of counsel that we have not heard. Elrond is far away, and darkness gathers between us, and all this year the shadows have grown longer. Nay, there was no change of counsel, said the Lady Galadriel, speaking for the first time. Her voice was clear and musical, but deeper than woman's wont. Gandalf the Grey set out with the company, but he did not pass the borders of this land. Now, tell us where he is, for I much desire to speak with him again. But I cannot see him from afar, unless he comes within the fences of Lothlórien. A grey mist is about him, and the ways of his feet and of his mind are hidden from me. Alas, said Aragorn, Gandalf the Grey fell into shadow. He remained in Moria and did not escape. At these words, all the elves in the hall cried aloud in grief and amazement. These are evil tidings, said Celeborn, the most evil that have been spoken here in long years, full of grievous deeds. He turned to Haldir. Why has nothing of this been told to me before? He asked in the elven tongue. We have not spoken to Haldir of our deeds or our purpose, said Legolas. At first we were weary, and danger was too close behind, and afterwards we almost forgot our grief for a time, as we walked in gladness on the fair paths of Lorien. Yet our grief is great, and our loss cannot be mended, said Frodo. Gandalf was our guide, and he led us through Moria, and when our escape seemed beyond hope, he saved us, and he fell. Tell us now the full tale, said Celeborn.
Get your popcorn. It's time.
Get your popcorn out, man. Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, let's go back to the beginning of your reading here.
Mm-hmm.
And first thing, so we know that Elrond was sending messengers. We knew that already. Celeborn speaks about it here. This seems to rule out the possibility of any kind of Osanwe, like we were talking about in the last chapter.
Yeah,
I think last time we were talking about, we knew he sent out some messengers, before, but weren't sure about sending out messages afterwards. But I don't know. So said the messages. I mean, does it preclude Osanwe?
So said the messages. There's change of counsel that we have not heard. I mean, the only thing that I can think of that maybe doesn't preclude Osanwe would be the fact that he says that darkness gathers between us. So maybe there's an implication that for some reason that darkness makes Osanwe over a distance harder.
Could be. Maybe.
I don't know. I'm thinking messages. So said the messages. And don't we get something later on that talks about Elrond sending messages? But I guess he could still send those via Osanwe.
I mean, he could. I'm not sure. I guess I'm not ruling it out. I wouldn't.
That's true. Out. Maybe ruling out is too strong. Maybe suggest that maybe that's not the case here.
Yeah, I mean, we know he has sent messengers. Again, we saw that back in the
His
Rainbow
sons.
South.
Yeah,
exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So messages, regular, more mundane messages have been sent. I guess.
Right.
I don't know. Although we had this in our notes, like probably not Osanwe. I don't know. Maybe it is.
Yeah.
I guess we can't say for sure, but I think you're right. The idea that darkness gathers between us does seem to suggest that would be harder, and that there would be Although maybe it's just the physical darkness, just all the orcs in the mountains that make it harder to get messages across through regular messengers. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's hard
be.
to say.
I don't know.
Regardless, they have not had the full story. They don't know everything, and so they think that maybe plans had been changed. That's kind of the point of this.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe it was different. We'd heard this, but maybe it was this other plan.
Maybe Gandalf had a thing. We don't know.
Maybe. But Galadriel seems to know more than her husband here, doesn't she? I mean, her statement, no, there was no chains of counsel. He did set out, but he didn't pass into our land. Now, her statement, this idea about I cannot see him from afar unless, that statement suggests that maybe she ordinarily could see him from afar, at least within the borders of Lorien.
Certainly, yeah. I definitely think she could. Now, whether that's due to some innate power or her ring or the fact that they are both ring bearers.
That's the one I'm thinking towards, is maybe that they're both bearers of rings of power enables them or strengthens that bond of connection. Maybe even strengthens their Osanwe.
It probably does. It could, because we know that's what the rings do, right? They enhance the natural magia
powers
of their bearers. Yeah,
that's right.
I mean, I dare say she probably could see a lot of things from afar.
Yeah,
but probably you'd probably think that maybe having the rings would allow them to connect with each other over longer distances, almost like having your own Palantir in your mind.
Mm-hmm. Sort of like having Find My iPhone on.
Yeah, find my friends.
Yeah, find my
fellow ring bearers.
Find my ring bearers.
Gandalf's just walking around. All of a sudden, his ring goes ping.
Who wants me now? Ping. What's up with that?
Yeah.
All right. So she asks about Gandalf. She's like, no, he did set out, but I can't see him. What's going on? Aragorn doesn't mince words here. He goes straight for it. He doesn't soften the blow. Says that he fell, didn't escape Moria.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to pause at the reaction of the elves. I think the other times I've read this, I've kind of glossed over this. I didn't really think about that one sentence, about the fact that they all cried aloud in grief and amazement. This isn't just sorrow. This is grief. This is intense, crying grief. It shows an appreciation for and a love of Gandalf.
This isn't just a clamor of surprise. This isn't just like all of a sudden everybody in the hall starts going, what happened? Did you hear about that? Did you know that? It's not that.
Right.
There's actual grief here. There's actually crying aloud. There's a bit of wailing. I don't know that they're quite breaking down into tears just yet, but there's a
No,
lot of
we know they will.
there's shock.
There is.
They will for sure. But yeah, there's
Yeah.
kind of this moment of shock, this sad shock you can imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. Celeborn seems a little bit disappointed in Haldir's intelligence gathering, right? Like, why has nothing of this been told to me before? I wonder if he thinks, well, maybe if he tortured the dwarf, we could have gotten some more information.
Yeah.
Oh, man,
And we will definitely see that side of Celeborn in just a moment.
Yes, we will.
Because right now you're thinking, what? Of course, Celeborn loves the dwarves, right? He wants to be their friends. Wait. Let's just see what happens.
Maybe.
Yeah. But Legolas, he jumps to Haldir's defense, of course, because, Celeborn
Right.
said this to Haldir in Sindarin.
In the Elvish tongue, right, exactly.
So Legolas jumps to his defense, and he's like, look, we didn't tell him anything. We were tired. Then we were happy. We were at peace. And then we
Right.
were blindfolded. So,
And then we were blindfolded. We kind of forgot. Yeah.
Yeah. We just kind of forgot to say anything about it.
Got a little distracted there.
Yeah. And then Frodo really just comes in and says, like, just because we forgot, don't think that we're not sad about this, which seems like
Yeah,
an
you're right.
interesting thing to say.
You're
Like,
right. It is.
our
isn't
grief
it?
is great and our loss cannot be mended. Well, yeah, we know, Frodo. Nobody's questioning your
The sincerity of your
grief here.
sorrow here? No.
Yeah. But then he said that Gandalf saved us from beyond hope. When our escape
Yeah.
seemed
I
beyond
thought I
hope,
was
and
hoping
he
you'd land
sacrificed
on that.
himself.
That's
Yeah.
really big right there.
Yeah.
It's a catastrophic moment, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Seemed beyond hope. And
Gandalf's
Gandalf
sacrifice
saved us.
is catastrophic. Absolutely.
Yes, it is. And it's a small reminder of that here. It's another blink and you miss it sort of moment with, this idea of hope. But
Right.
Great point.
And because now that Celeborn knows that it ends in a catastrophe, he's like, this is going to be a good story. Let me hear it,
Yeah.
So
Get the popcorn out.
got my
Tell us the
popcorn,
story.
got my Coke, got my 44-ounce soda, and I'm ready. Give me the
With
story.
a red vine as a straw.
I think he's a little too old for that, don't you?
Well, it's eco-friendly these days. You can't have plastic straws anymore.
That is
Red
true.
vine makes a great straw.
Yeah, I guess it would.
Anyway, when I was 11, it did. I don't know if it does now.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, I think,
Yeah.
Celeborn probably outgrew that when he was about 3,000.
Well
So-
played, sir.
Aragorn is the one. You didn't read this part, and we're not going to read this part because we know the
Right.
story. But
Mhm.
Aragorn tells the full tale. Again, we see Aragorn stepping up and, kind of being the leader of the group.
Yeah.
It is interesting that when Aragorn talks about the Balrog,
Uh-huh.
he says that it was something I've never seen before. He
Right.
didn't really know what it was. It's just something.
No.
He said. I mean, really, he even says it seemed an evil of the ancient world.
Right.
So he doesn't even really fully know exactly what it was.
No, it's beyond the scope of his knowledge. Yeah.
Mhm. Which is really fascinating when you think about all the knowledge Aragorn has.
Mm-hmm. But it's not beyond the knowledge of Legolas. He jumps in and says, oh, no, I know what it was. Exactly. It was a Balrog of Morgoth. And there's nothing worse except for Sauron himself.
Yeah, man, that is a telling comment.
Boy, isn't it?
Of all elf banes, the most deadly, the greatest one,
Hmm.
except for the one sitting in the
Sauron
dark
himself.
tower. That's
Mhm.
a powerful statement.
And then Gimli takes that a step further. It's not just a Balrog. It was Durin's Bane, right? This was the thing that the dwarves fear the most. Which, of course, maybe that's not something you want to say to Celeborn, who then points out, look, if we'd known that the dwarves woke this thing, I wouldn't have let you in here. And
there's the racism.
there it is. That's right.
Because,
That's right.
I mean, you're totally victim blaming here.
Yeah, you are.
It's like the dwarves woke this thing and all got killed. Okay, so
They've already paid the price.
yeah, let's let that go. But anyway,
Yeah.
this
And
whole thing
besides,
about-
it's not as though Gimli himself knocked on the door and said, wakey, wakey, Balrog. Time to
Right,
get up.
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
Gimli had nothing to do with this, man.
Yeah. Right. I know.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah,
Just
it
that
is
he's
very,
another short, stout person that's a reason to blame Gimli for it.
It's a very pointed you. We would have forbidden you to pass the northern borders.
Oh, yes.
You and all that went with you. So
Right.
all of these dwarf friends with you would not have been allowed if I had known that some dwarves once upon a time woke this thing. That's
Yeah.
Celeborn, man.
And he
come
even lumps Gandalf into this, right? Talking about how he fell from wisdom into folly. And we'll get to that in a second. But
on.
yeah. Oh, man. And I mean, this is a little Melian Thingol moment coming up here.
This is a honey, come over here. We need to have a word.
Yeah. It is. It really is. But before we do that, I want to point out one quick thing. Hammond and Skull point out that in an unpublished letter to Eileen Elgar in 1963, Tolkien said specifically that Celeborn was worried about what might pursue the company out of Moria and into Lothlórien. So there is a
Sure.
I'm looking out for my realm here.
Yeah, and I get that. Of course, that's what he's concerned about.
Yeah.
But come on.
But yeah, still.
To think that even Gandalf fell into folly is, I think, is the step too far. I mean,
that is
that and all the dwarf racism. So, but again, we saw in episode 160, Celeborn has a lot of reasons to hate dwarves. It's been a long time. He needs to let it go.
He does.
So, yeah, Galadriel's going to take him aside. She's not going to correct him in front of the guys.
Well, kind of she does.
That's true. She really does, doesn't she? Because I'm imagining this really funny scene where she pulls him aside, but no, that's not what happens. She actually calls him out right in front of the guys.
Right in front of them.
She's like,
she doesn't name him, but she might as well. Yeah.
It's very passive aggressive, isn't it?
It is. It's third person, very passive aggressive. He, not you. He.
One would say that at the last Gandalf fell from wisdom into folly. She's like, yeah, he would be rash who said that thing.
One would say that, and one would be an idiot.
One would be.
So don't be an idiot, husband.
I'm not saying you, honey, but if somebody said that, he would be silly.
Yeah.
All right.
Why don't you go ahead and read that passage? This is the one, folks, that Sean had to pay me money to read.
All right. He would be rash indeed that said that thing, said Galadriel gravely. Needless were none of the deeds of Gandalf in life. Those that followed him knew not his mind and cannot report his full purpose. But however it may be with the guide, the followers are blameless. Do not repent of your welcome to the dwarf. If our folk had been exiled long and far from Lothlórien, who of the Galadhrim, even Celeborn the Wise, would pass nigh and would not wish to look upon their ancient home, though it had become an abode of dragons? Dark is the water of Keled-Zaram, and cold are the springs of Kibel-Nala, and fair were the many-pillared halls of Khazad-dûm in elder days before the fall of mighty kings beneath the stone. She looked upon Gimli, who sat glowering and sad, and she smiled. And the dwarf, hearing the names given in his own ancient tongue, looked up and met her eyes, and it seemed to him that he looked suddenly into the heart of an enemy, and saw there love and understanding. Wonder came into his face, and then he smiled in answer. He rose clumsily and bowed in dwarf fashion, saying, Yet more fair is the living land of Lórien, and the Lady Galadriel is above all the jewels that lie beneath the earth.
Yeah. Beautiful. Wipe those eyes, Sean.
Seriously, folks,
Do you need a tissue?
I wasn't ashamed to say this to Alan. I'm not ashamed to say this on Discord. I actually wept when I was reading this moment.
Yeah,
a few days ago.
It's a moment for sure.
I immediately put my book down. I emailed Alan. I said, please give me this passage. So thank you.
Yeah. You can just imagine how Gimli feels these words when she speaks to him. And Tolkien does such a great job of placing you into his mind and into his heart.
Yeah.
And you can just feel it kind of warming. And he realizes that this enemy, quote unquote, is showing him such compassion and such understanding. And he has nothing to respond with except just love and admiration. It's a beautiful thing. It really is.
And I love that it's almost made light of with this phrasing about how he rose clumsily and he bowed in dwarf fashion. And I don't mean it's made light of, I think, in a way that's very kind of disarming to the reader in a good way, because it shows the huge disconnect between this tall, gorgeous, ancient, wise lady of the elves and, stunted, not rustic, but what's the word? Kind of rough around the edges dwarf.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. They're not known.
He's not refined.
They're very polite people, but they're not known for their refinement. That's a very good way to put it. And so you see this huge contrast between these two characters, and yet she shows so much love to him and he returns that love to her, and it is absolutely a beautiful moment.
Yeah, it is, and it's going to get even more so later down the line, isn't it?
Yeah, but anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves.
We are. We'll go back to the beginning of your passage where we really see Galadriel's wisdom in play, along with her slight of her husband.
Well, it's really interesting because, Gandalf didn't do things by accident, and Galadriel knows this, and she reminds everybody there that he had a purpose. You may not have known his full purpose, but
These
he had
people
a
may not have
purpose.
even known their purpose. That's right.
Right. I'm actually kind of reminded a little bit of Gandalf's words to Boromir at the Moria Gate. Remember when Boromir started questioning, well, why did you bring us here then if you can't even open the door? And
Right.
Gandalf said, you may ask what is the use of my deeds when they are proved useless. And there's a
That's
little bit of
right.
that in Galadriel's rebuke of Celeborn here.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah,
you
there is.
don't fully understand what's happening in the world. You don't fully understand what Gandalf's purpose is or what Gandalf had in mind. So don't question. Don't question.
Yeah.
And that I think is really wonderful because it foreshadows that Gandalf's part in this story is not over.
No.
Now, obviously, we know that because we've read ahead. But for somebody who hasn't read this before, this scene, this moment, really tells you that Gandalf is still at work somehow. You may not realize that he's coming back, but you know that he has somehow set up the chessboard the way he wants it.
That's right.
And I think it's really powerful.
And in a way that even speaks to a higher cause in that sense. Gandalf didn't do things by accident, and neither does Ilúvatar. This is all part of Spibimi, and even Gandalf's sacrifices we'll see is a big part of that picture. And so, let's not look short term, husband.
Yeah.
Let's realize who we're talking about here, and it would be rash to say that he'd fallen into folly.
Yeah.
So,
and she also says explicitly, don't blame these 8 people who remain. Because they just followed him as a leader. They didn't know his full purpose. So
which is what he is or was, right? I mean, that's who he's supposed to be. People are supposed to follow him. So if he led them into Moria, don't blame them for following his lead.
Right. They did.
And then she goes even further, right? She even says, look, we'd have done the same as them.
I love that.
And she's right. And that is so, it's such an example of empathy. And that's a really important thing, as I think we'll see here. But I want to go back to Unfinished Tales for this. Tolkien says that Galadriel was more far-sighted in this than Celeborn, and she perceived from the beginning that Middle-earth could not be saved from the residue of evil that Morgoth had left behind him, save by a union of all the peoples who were in their way and in their measure opposed to him. She looked upon the dwarves also with the eye of a commander, seeing in them the finest warriors to pit against the orcs. Moreover, Galadriel was a Noldo, and she had a natural sympathy with their minds and their passionate love of crafts of hand, sympathy much greater than that found among many of the Eldar. The dwarves were the children of Aule, and Galadriel, like others of the Noldor, had been a pupil of Aule and Yavanna in Valinor.
Yeah. And I remember reading that not long ago, and it's a really, really telling passage. And I love this, the way that she uses Gimli's language, right, to sort of make this connection with him. She looks at him. She speaks the names of the Mirror and the springs and the halls in the original Dwarvish, and
Khuzdul,
and Khuzdul. And so, I think this is really important because she really is establishing a connection here with Gimli. She's looking directly at him, using these words in the secret tongue of the dwarves. And let's go back all the way to season 1 and remember what happened to the Noldor when they came back to Beleriand.
Exactly what I was thinking.
How their language was treated. Galadriel was one of the original exiles from Valinor.
Yes, she remembers.
And she she lived with Thingol and Melian.
That's right, she did.
And she would have seen firsthand Thingol's ban on the Quenya language. Galadriel knows firsthand the power that your native tongue can have. And obviously this is something that's very important to Tolkien.
Yeah.
And so the fact that she, who has experienced sort of, I don't even know what you'd call it, sort of a ban on
have your language
sort of linguistic discrimination. Yeah, exactly. Have your language be shunned. I was thinking linguistic discrimination,
That's a great way of putting it, yeah.
To have experienced that herself. And now, obviously, the Dwarvish language is not discriminated against. It's not banned.
Well, no.
It's not even really shunned. They keep it secret themselves.
Right. But, it's their choice, yeah.
Right. But she knows the power of one's native tongue, and the fact that she speaks these words in Gimli's language, when as you said a little while ago, the elves can be haughty at times, and
Yeah, they can.
she really connects with him on his level, and it's just such a beautiful moment.
It really is. It's a very deeply moving moment, and it's one that Galadriel herself has caused, has manipulated, if you will. I don't mean that in a negative sense. She's chosen a way. She's chosen tools to show him this empathy, to show him this compassion.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's a fantastic moment. It really is.
And I think it's wonderful what you just said now. You just said she shows him empathy and she shows him compassion. And I'm thinking empathy and sympathy.
Yeah, yeah.
She's showing empathy by putting herself in his shoes. Who of us would not have done the same thing, would not have wanted to look upon their ancestral home? And she also shows sympathy for, what these halls used to be before the fall.
Oh, I know.
And
because,
the
of course, she'd
sadness
been
of what's
through them,
lost.
right? I mean,
that's
don't we
true.
read someplace she'd gone through the Dwarven Kingdom on multiple occasions?
We read that Tolkien Reading Day. Yep, that's in that same section, History of Galadriel and Celeborn. You're absolutely right. So, yeah, she's showing just empathy and sympathy for Gimli here, and it's such a powerful connection between the two.
It really is deep.
And you see it. You see what Gimli sees in Galadriel at that moment. And as you said, this beautiful notion of looking into the heart of an enemy and seeing love and understanding.
Yeah.
And so we see his response now is very earnest, genuine, deeply felt response. And we see how this love blossoms over the coming chapters. So
yeah, we do. Well, I guess this is as good a time as any to do a sidebar on Galadriel.
All right.
I think we should acknowledge again something that we've mentioned more than once. The history of Galadriel and of Celeborn is not exactly clean cut. In the aptly named chapter in Unfinished Tales, Christopher Tolkien even starts by admitting there is no part of the history of Middle-earth more full of problems than the story of Galadriel and Celeborn. I love his understatement there. And it must
and
be
yet
admitted,
we keep going back to it.
I know. Well, because
there's great stuff in there.
There really is. He goes on to say that it must be admitted that there are severe inconsistencies embedded in the traditions, as he puts kind of in air quotes, or to look at the matter from another point of view, that the role and importance of Galadriel only emerged slowly, and that her story underwent continual refashionings. I love that phrase.
It's such a great phrase. Continual.
Our show goes under continual refashionings, doesn't it? We don't edit it. We just continually refashion it.
There you go. Yep. And while we will go into the continual refashionings in more detail when we finally get to Unfinished Tales, we do want to talk about the changing reasons why she's actually still here in Middle-earth. Sort of an overview of the timeline of Tolkien's thoughts on why she's still hanging around here. Now, Christopher Tolkien believes that when his father first wrote this chapter and conceived of the character of Galadriel initially, that a ban on her return to Valinor was actually not on his mind.
Right.
He's basing this in large part on a text called Concerning Galadriel and Celeborn that he believes was written after Lord of the Rings. Christopher says, it is very notable that not only is there no mention in this text of a ban on Galadriel's return into the West, but it even seems from a passage at the beginning of the account that no such idea was present. While later in the narrative, Galadriel's remaining in Middle-earth after the defeat of Sauron and Eriador is ascribed to her sense that it was her duty not to depart while he was still finally unconquered. This is a chief support of the hesitant view expressed above that the story of the ban was later than the writing of the Lord of the Rings.
He then quotes his father's writing from that text. For love of Celeborn, who would not leave Middle-earth, and probably with some pride of her own, for she had been one of those eager to adventure there, she did not go west at the downfall of Melkor, but crossed Ered-Lindon with Celeborn and came into Eriador.
But by the time The Road Goes Ever On was published in 1967, Tolkien had changed his mind. There he described her as the last survivor of the princes and queens who had led the revolting Noldor to exile in Middle-earth. After the overthrow of Morgoth at the end of the First Age, a ban was set upon her return, and she had replied proudly that she had no wish to do so. Later, after the fall of Sauron, in reward for all that she had done to oppose him, but above all for her rejection of the ring when it came within her power, the ban was lifted, and she returned over the sea.
And there are a couple of letters in that same time frame that confirm this. Letter number 297, which was a draft to Mr. Rang, also in 1967, Tolkien mentioned the special ban prohibiting the exiled elves, followers of the rebellious Feanor, from return, referred to in Galadriel's lament. And later he says, The exiles were allowed to return, save for a few chief actors in the rebellion, of whom at the time of The Lord of the Rings, only Galadriel remained. Now, that passage has a footnote where Tolkien adds, "At the time of her lament in Lórien, she believed this to be perennial as long as earth endured. Hence, she concludes her lament," and we're talking about the lament that she sings at the end of the next chapter.
Mm-hmm.
She concludes her lament with a wish or prayer that Frodo may, as a special grace, be granted a purgatorial, but not penal, sojourn in Eressia, the solitary isle in sight of Aman, though for her the way is closed. Her prayer was granted, but also her personal ban was lifted in reward for her services against Sauron, and above all for her rejection of the temptation to take the ring when offered to her. So at the end, we see her taking ship.
Now that's really important because people do frequently ask about how Frodo was allowed to go to Eressia in the first place.
Yeah.
Who exactly was it who prayed to the Valar on his behalf? And here you go.
There it is.
Well, then later in Letter 320, written in 1971, Tolkien says that Galadriel was a penitent. In her youth, a leader in the rebellion against the Valar. At the end of the First Age, she proudly refused forgiveness or permission to return.
And then there's this segment from Unfinished Tales that Christopher Tolkien identifies as a very late and primarily philological essay, certainly written after the publication of The Road Goes Ever On. Now, in it, we see a change. She's no longer a follower of the rebellious Feanor. And though she rebelled, she didn't lead the revolting Noldor. Instead, we get this from Tolkien. Galadriel was the greatest of the Noldor, except Feanor maybe, though she was wiser than he. Low bar. And her wisdom increased with the long years. She was strong of body, mind, and will, a match for both the lore masters and the athletes of the Eldar in the days of their youth. She was proud, strong, and self-willed. She had dreams of far lands and dominions that might be her own to order as she would without tutelage. Yet deeper still there dwelt in her the noble and generous spirit of the Vanyar, and a reverence for the Valar that she could not forget. From her earliest years, she had a marvelous gift of insight into the minds of others, but judged them with mercy and understanding. And she withheld her goodwill from none, save only Feanor. In him she perceived a darkness that she hated and feared, though she did not perceive that the shadow of the same evil had fallen upon the minds of all the Noldor and upon her own.
And Tolkien continues, "So it came to pass that when the light of Valinor failed, forever as the Noldor thought, she joined the rebellion against the Valar who commanded them to stay. And once she had set foot upon that road of exile, she would not relent, but rejected the last message of the Valar, and came under the doom of Mandos. Even after the merciless assault upon the Teleri and the rape of their ships, though she fought fiercely against Feanor in defense of her mother's kin, she did not turn back. Her pride was unwilling to return, a defeated suppliant for pardon. But now she burned with desire to follow Feanor with her anger to whatever lands he might come, and to thwart him in all ways that she could. Pride still moved her when, at the end of the elder days after the final overthrow of Morgoth, she refused the pardon of the Valar for all who had fought against him, and remained in Middle-earth. It was not until 2 long ages more had passed, when at last all that she had desired in her youth came to her hand, the ring of power and the dominion of Middle-earth of which she had dreamed, that her wisdom was full grown, and she rejected it, and passing the last test, departed from Middle-earth forever."
Now, this is a good point. I know we still have some more things to read, but I think this is a good point to discuss some of these things. I want to talk about, well, the Feanor unfriending. I love this, right? The idea that she withheld her goodwill from nobody except for him because she perceived that darkness.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, well, and that's why it makes sense that she would not be a follower of Feanor. And when we get this explanation that she followed so that she could thwart him as much as she could in the First Age. It's really
because he'd attacked her mother's kin, I mean,
she's the one who, and you would expect her not to want to follow him after that. Yeah.
No.
Absolutely.
But she didn't even want to really necessarily follow him before that. She was maybe going along with him. She might not have been at that point trying to thwart him, but she certainly didn't trust him. And we know that she was wiser than he was.
She already did not like him. We know about the as you said, the unfriending bit and the hair thing that we talked about back in season 1.
And that we'll talk about again when we get to the gifts.
We'll be talking about in a few episodes, But I think it's very interesting that her pride was unwilling to return. She she had already kind of changed her mind a little bit.
Yeah.
Changed her mind is too strong. She probably was having reservations.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it was like she's too far down that road and just her pride won't allow her to go back. That's
Yeah.
really interesting. And so you can almost imagine her sort of rationalizing it a little bit. Well, my
Mhm.
pride doesn't want me to turn back. So if I'm going to go do this thing, I'm going to go and at least make it harder for Feanor to wreak all the
Right.
havoc that he wants to wreak.
Right.
And it turned out easy because he ended up dying not long after coming back.
Well, don't have to thwart him.
Yeah.
Pretty easy to thwart a dead
Well,
guy.
I guess that was taken care of.
Yeah. But, you know, the passage that I'd read earlier from the primarily philological essay, I like how we really see some amazingly good things in her, right? This idea that she has this gift of insight, but judges with mercy and understanding,
Mm-hmm.
that she was strong of body and mind, but also she was proud. She was self-willed. She
Mhm.
wanted to rule lands without anybody over her.
That's really key. It's not just a personal pride in herself and her abilities. She actually wants dominion.
Yeah.
She dreamed of dominion of Middle-earth.
Yes, she
And-
did.
And so as we're going to see at the end of this chapter, the fact that she's going to reject the ring when it's offered to her,
Mm-hmm.
it's
That's huge.
It's everything.
It really is.
It is a redemptive moment for her. And I think
Yeah.
that that's easy to miss. We might think, oh, Galadriel's tempted. She's tempted, but she's a good person. We think she's going to do
Right.
the right thing. And yes, she is a good person, obviously.
Yeah.
But
there's
but she-
also weakness in her, too.
There
That's the
is-
thing. She's not a black
exactly.
and white character where she's just
Exactly.
purely good. Yeah.
Exactly. There is weakness in her. And not only is her temptation a very real temptation, as we're going to see in a couple of episodes,
Yes,
but
we
it's
will.
also, a redemptive moment for a lifetime of pride and dreams of domination and her own transgressions. So,
Yeah. It really is.
really
It's that transformative moment. Mhm.
yeah, it truly is. It's going to be a fantastic moment.
Oh, I
And I
can't
can't
wait.
wait to
That
get
is
there.
going to be a great episode.
It's only
isn't
a
it?
couple of episodes, 2 episodes away at this
Two
point.
episodes
so-
away. Yeah.
Yeah.
Already working on the research on the document now, as a matter of fact. So
Excellent. Excellent.
we'll have that soon.
And I did want to point out, you said it's a low bar to be wiser than Feanor. I just want to
Yeah.
throw out there, remember, it's wise in the sense of possessing knowledge, not in the
Not
sense
sagacity.
of sagacity or good judgment, right?
That is correct. Boy, I love that quote. That is a good one,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
So speaks to Feanor. Yeah.
Well, then in 1973, less than a month before he passed away, Tolkien wrote a letter to Lord Halsbury that clearly shows that he had changed his mind a little bit. He said, Galadriel was unstained. She had committed no evil deeds. She was an enemy of Feanor. She did not reach Middle-earth with the other Noldor, but independently.
Mhm.
Her reasons for desiring to go to Middle-earth were legitimate, and she would have been permitted to depart, but for the misfortune that before she set out, the revolt of Feanor broke out, and she became involved in the desperate measures of Manwë and the ban on all emigration.
Hmm.
I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah.
Does it feel like he's backpedaling just a little bit too much? Like he's really trying to
Yeah.
trying to make her too pure, too good? All those things we just said she was not?
Yeah. Was that one of the letters where he talked about maybe drawing some inspiration from Mary for his
Maybe so.
characterization of Galadriel? That might explain why he was kind of retconning her into a much better character.
That could be, yeah.
Maybe. I'll have to double check that. But we also get something in Unfinished Tales that shows really where Tolkien was finally heading on the story of Galadriel. This was never really fully fleshed out, told only in an outline. But Christopher says, it is the last writing of my father's on the subject of Galadriel and Celeborn, and probably the last on Middle-earth and Valinor, set down in the last month of his life. And he goes on to tell us what this last writing contains. In this, he emphasized the commanding stature of Galadriel already in Valinor, the equal, if unlike, in endowments of Feanor. And it is said here that, so far from joining in Feanor's revolt, she was in every way opposed to him. She did indeed wish to depart from Valinor and go into the wide world of Middle-earth for the exercise of her talents. For, quote, being brilliant in mind and swift in action, she had early absorbed all of what she was capable of the teaching which the Valar thought fit to give the Eldar, end quote. And she felt confined in the tutelage of Aman. This desire of Galadriel's was, it seems, known to Manwë, and he had not forbidden her, but nor had she been given formal leave to depart.
And after going to Alqualande to live with her mother's kin, she meets Celeborn in this version.
Yeah.
They plan on building and sailing a ship to Middle-earth when everything changed. The trees are destroyed.
Sail away. Come sail,
Away. Come
No,
sail.
no, I will not sing this morning.
All right.
Did I say morning? Evening. Sorry.
It's hard to tell these days.
You're not kidding. 1 hour blends into the other. I might be having dinner at 4 o'clock or 9:30. I don't know.
Yeah. So they were about to come sail away when everything changed. The trees were destroyed, Melkor escaped, and Feanor revolted. And we get this from Christopher. In Feanor's revolt that followed the darkening of Valinor, Galadriel had no part. Indeed, she with Celeborn fought heroically in defense of Aqualande against the assault of the Noldor. And Celeborn's ship was saved from them. Galadriel, despairing now of Valinor and horrified by the violence and cruelty of Feanor, set sail into the darkness without waiting for Manwë's leave, which would undoubtedly have been withheld in that hour, however legitimate her desire in itself. It was thus that she came under the ban set upon all departure, and Valinor was shut against her return. Christopher acknowledges that this writing would have entailed a good deal of alteration in the narrative of the Silmarillion, but my father doubtless intended to do so.
Yeah.
So
because
we need to
that's
talk
what he
about
does.
this.
He constantly alters the narrative and fixes stories.
Well, and obviously this is a huge departure from the published Silmarillion, in which Celeborn is one of the Sindar that she meets after she comes back to Middle-earth. This is the version we're talking about here is the version in which Celeborn was one of the Teleri of Aqualande, where he had that other Telerin name that I don't think we want to say.
Yeah.
But
maybe we should. Maybe we should.
You think we should finally say?
Teleporno.
Teleporno was his Telerin name.
Yeah. That was his name.
It's a pure cognate of Celeborn, but Professor, it just does not sound good.
Well, and you just don't want to ever Google that.
Do not.
Please. If you do not hold us responsible. Do not send us your results. Do not mention it in any way, shape, or form on any of our social media channels. Thank you.
We want no part of it. And that's why I almost had the good sense to make sure we didn't say it, but
you had the good sense not to say it, but you allowed me to.
I cracked that door, and I shouldn't have.
I know, and I come barging through.
My co-host just barged through it, but
yeah, that's what I do.
But no, I think back to old Alatariel and Teleporno in Aqualande, that is very different from what we get in the Silmarillion, and again, I do kind of feel like he is really trying to absolve her of any guilt. Yeah. I kind of like the more nuanced Galadriel that we get in the Silmarillion, and I like. I
agree.
I like what it does to her moment later in this chapter, like we were just saying. So, I guess we put it in there in the interest of kind of giving you the full story in the sidebar, but
and letting you know where Tolkien was intending to go. Where
he
with
was
that
ultimately
story.
Going with it. Yeah,
because we always kind of land on whatever he decided most recently. Is kind of like quote unquote the rest of the story.
Usually, yeah, I know. It's
not always
right. It is tough when it goes up against the Silmarillion.
Yeah, you're right.
But again, Christopher himself acknowledged that there were places where he made mistakes in compiling the Silmarillion, and he probably thought that this was one of them. But I like the Silmarillion version. I like the Galadriel that has some sins to atone for, and it makes that moment with the ring so much more powerful.
I agree. I think it does. Speaking of Galadriel, we're going to go ahead and look at the words of Galadriel here, giving some of her wisdom. And this is right after Gimli's response to her, so I'm going to pick up there. There was a silence. At length, Celeborn spoke again. I did not know that your plight was so evil, he said. Let Gimli forget my harsh words. I spoke in the trouble of my heart. I will do what I can to aid you, each according to his wish and need, but especially that one of the little folk who bears the burden. You can kind of, for a moment, see Frodo's eyes getting big on that, can't you? Like, what, you know that I'm carrying what?
Yeah.
That's a little shocking, but Galadriel immediately jumps back in.
Yep.
Your quest is known to us, said Galadriel, looking at Frodo, but we will not here speak of it more openly. Yet not in vain will it prove, maybe, that you came to this land seeking aid, as Gandalf himself plainly purposed. For the Lord of the Galadhrim is accounted the wisest of the elves of Middle-earth, and a giver of gifts beyond the power of kings. He has dwelt in the west since the days of dawn, and I have dwelt with him years uncounted. For ere the fall of Nargothrond or Gondolin, I passed over the mountains. Together, through ages of the world, we have fought the long defeat. I it was who first summoned the White Council, and if my designs had not gone amiss, it would have been governed by Gandalf the Grey, and then mayhap things would have gone otherwise. But even now, there is hope left. I will not give you counsel, saying do this or do that, for not in doing or contriving, nor in choosing between this course and another, can I avail, but only in knowing what was and is, and in part also what shall be. But this I will say to you, your quest stands upon the edge of a knife. Stray but a little, and it will fail, to the ruin of all. Yet hope remains while all the company is true. And with that word she held them with her eyes, and in silence looked searchingly at each of them in turn. None save Legolas and Aragorn could long endure her glance. Sam quickly blushed and hung his head. At length the Lady Galadriel released them from her eyes, and she smiled. Do not let your hearts be troubled, she said. Tonight you shall sleep in peace. Then they sighed, and felt suddenly weary, as those who have been questioned long and deeply, though no words had been spoken openly. Go now, said Celeborn. You are worn with sorrow and much toil. Even if your quest did not concern us closely, you should have refuge in this city until you are healed and refreshed. Now you shall rest, and we will not speak of your further road for a while. Long passage, and as we're fond of saying, there's a lot to unpack here. I know we haven't really used that in a while, so it's okay to throw that out there.
It's probably been a couple of weeks since we said it.
Yeah, at least.
So let's go back to the beginning of it, where Celeborn, okay, he takes the hint from his wife, apologizes. He backs up the whole "you people woke the Balrog" position, and
yes, he does.
Asks for Gimli's forgiveness. Not forgiveness, no. Hopes that Gimli will forget his harsh words, I guess. And then, as you kind of pointed out, makes this sideways mention of the ring.
I know. Wait, what?
And Frodo's like, what?
Who bears the what now?
Yeah. Galadriel jumps in quickly, like you said. Hey, it's right. We know, but shh, don't say anything.
Yeah, we don't talk about that. The first rule of the burden is we don't talk about the burden.
Exactly.
Now,
second rule of the burden is we do not talk about the burden.
That's right. So then Galadriel, this is what I was mentioning earlier, she tells us some things about Celeborn. Again, he is not just, a trophy husband.
A big bag of racism?
Candy.
I'm sorry. No, you go ahead.
A big bag of racism. No, man, you're getting him confused with Haldir. He's accounted the wisest of the elves of Middle-earth. Hello? That's a huge, huge bar. The wisest of the elves of Middle-earth. My goodness,
He's accounted the wisest of the elves of Middle-earth.
Well,
she doesn't say he is the wisest of the elves of Middle-earth.
Accounted. Okay, fair enough. I mean, do they have a wisdom test? So how do they know? He's accounted that.
No, I'm joking. I know
you are.
I'm playing around with the idea that she might think she's wiser.
Right. I'm sure she knows she's wiser.
And she probably is. But, I kind of think that, well, no, I'm probably reading too much.
Maybe it's read, for the Lord of the Galadhrim accounts himself the wisest of the elves of Middle-earth.
Or just that, hey, people might account him that, but they don't really know that the real wisdom behind the throne.
That really, the wisdom behind, that's right, it's me. It's me.
Yeah.
No. And he's also a giver of gifts beyond the power of kings. Now, that's an interesting phrase. I've got no idea what that means, beyond the power of kings. You want to talk about that? Do you have any idea what that means?
I mean, because you remember in the Germanic tradition that a king is known for the gifts that he gives. That's how he wins loyalty, by giving gold and by giving treasure and things like that. And I think what she's saying here is that Celeborn is a lord who gives more than just gold. He's more than just well, I mean, it's funny because one of the words you see for Germanic kings is ring lord.
Right.
And I don't want to draw too much of a connection back to, Sauron, the Lord of the Rings, but it is interesting that I think she's just kind of pointing out that Celeborn is a giver of gifts that are not just material things. He gives gifts of wisdom.
That makes sense.
Gives
of
gifts
wisdom.
Of
that makes sense because that ties into what she just said about him, right?
Yeah.
He's not just a giver of material gifts. He's not just going to give you some silver or gold or some token.
Yeah.
He's going to give you wisdom.
He's going to give you wisdom. He's going to give you counsel and insight.
Yeah.
And
I won't give you counsel, but we'll get to that. Right.
Do kind of love that moment, but we'll get there.
Yeah, but before we get to that, what do we have? We've got how long they've been together.
They've been together for a long time. She says this is interesting because, well, I think she might be exaggerating a little bit. She says that before the fall of Nargothrond or Gondolin, that they passed over the mountains. Now, we know that they didn't pass over the mountains into this area of the world until the Second Age, right? Right? I mean...
Now I'm lost. Didn't they pass into Beleriand? Oh, boy.
They passed...
There's something for the P5. What do you think, Sean?
Well, what's your question? I mean, they passed into Beleriand before the fall of Nargothrond.
Out of Beleriand. Out of Beleriand. Into... Because that's what she means by passing over the mountains, right? Passing over the Arid Luin?
Maybe. I thought she meant over the Misty Mountains.
Oh, maybe.
But maybe she does mean over the Arid Luin, but even then, they didn't pass over the Arid Luin before the fall of Nargothrond or Gondolin. They were living in
Doriath.
Thank you. They were living in Doriath.
Right.
Until Thingol was killed. That's the whole reason that Celeborn has all that prejudice against dwarves.
Little exactly why he's not such a big fan of Gimli.
that little character flaw that I'm going to keep bringing up. He doesn't like dwarves because of Thingol's death. That happened after the fall of Nargothrond.
Yeah. That's a good point. I'm not quite sure what she means by all this. We're gonna have to dig into that maybe in the postscript.
I don't think there's anything to find, to be honest. I think it's just I think it's indicative of the fact that Tolkien was constantly changing his mind about the history of these characters.
Yeah.
I mean,
now, of course, he's been around for a long time, so she may be talking about their time together. That we have been fighting this long defeat. Again, another line we're going to get to. But the first part of that sentence, that he's dwelt in the West since the days of dawn. Yeah. She's talking about a time when the sun first appeared, right?
Yeah, that's true. Well, and maybe, that's true. So
it could be metaphorical. It could be,
No, I think it's true. If he's one of the Sindar, which is what it says in the Silmarillion, then he was living in Beleriand in the days of dawn, in the days of the stars before the sun. So that makes sense.
Right.
And maybe if she's just talking about herself passing over the mountains into Beleriand, maybe. I don't know.
No mountains to pass over to get into Beleriand.
No, that's true. Just the Pelori, but that doesn't really count.
Well, no, yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
interesting.
And besides, she passed into Beleriand before the founding of Nargothrond and Gondolin.
Right. Exactly. She was part of the initial wave, yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't know. What they're... I think it's just evidence that Tolkien was constantly reinventing these characters,
changing that particular narrative and these characters in particular.
Yeah, but I think what the really important line is in this passage is, "Together we've been fighting the long defeat."
Yeah. That's the key here, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And we talked about this. I think when we talked to Verlin Flieger a couple of seasons ago, and when we looked at the Beowulf essay, because this is such a Beowulfian concept. This idea of fighting the long defeat. Well, we talked about this back in the movie episodes, 50 and 51. Yeah. You're never going to defeat evil forever. You're always fighting this long defeat. Eventually, the forces of evil are going to overcome you. That is very Germanic. And Galadriel really encapsulates it.
Yeah, she does.
If you don't have that context, it seems like a very, forgive the pun, defeatist thing to say. It seems very pessimistic. Fighting the long defeat. What are you talking about? Aren't you fighting?
Why even bother if you're going to die, right? Yeah.
Right. But if you understand that Beowulfian, that Germanic ethos, then you understand what this means. That it's just we're going to lose eventually, but we have to fight because that's what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And it reminds me a little bit of Elrond in the Council of Elrond. He has a very similar line about that, doesn't he?
Oh, yeah, he does. Do you recall what that line was? I don't have that.
Yeah, Elrond's talking about the past. He's talking about the splendor of the banners of the last alliance and things. First, after he talks about, he's talking about that defeat, and he says that even that wasn't so amazing as when Thangorodrim was broken and the elves deemed that evil was ended forever, and it was not so. So there's a little bit of that Beowulfian long defeat. But then we get the same idea of long defeat just a couple paragraphs later. He says, "I have seen 3 ages in the west of the world, and many defeats and many fruitless victories." Even the victories aren't enough. Even the victories aren't going to do the job. We're going to eventually lose, but it's our job to do the very best and survive as long as we can and fight the good fight. Yeah. Very Germanic, as you said. Yeah.
Very.
So now to the quest, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Galadriel tells us that, she just points out, hey, look, I kind of wanted Gandalf to lead the White Council anyway.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
things might have gone a little bit differently if he had.
quite a bit differently.
Yeah.
But then I like this. She's not going to give direct counsel. I'm not going to tell you what to do. This is, again, go not to the elves, isn't it?
Especially not this elf.
Don't go to this elf.
Maybe
I'm not
Elrond, but yeah, not this one.
I'm not going to give you advice. My strength isn't giving you answers. My strength is in knowing the past and the present and even a part of the future. That's a pretty cool power. I think that would give you the ability to provide good counsel, but that's just me.
Well, I think that's the real answer to the question that sometimes people ask. Why wasn't Galadriel at the Council of Elrond?
Oh, yeah. We talked about that, right? Her empty chair,
Yeah. That's not her role. That's not what she does. She doesn't counsel, do, or choose. She knows.
Wow.
And
that's a good point. Yeah, she doesn't do. She doesn't do the actual fighting. She doesn't provide the actual counsel. She just has the knowledge. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. She's a resource for knowledge, for wisdom, but you can't really.
What do you do with wisdom? You can't wield wisdom.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way of putting it. You can't wield wisdom.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting thought. I hadn't really considered that before.
Yeah.
Certainly having that knowledge is a pretty amazing power. And I have to ask, I mean, I think we know the answer to that. Is it the ring? And the answer is both yes and no, right? She would have had that natural ability to begin with, going back to the letter that we read about her, not the letter, but the philological essay where he talks about the insight that she had and things along those lines.
Yeah.
So the ring just enhances that magia and gives her the ability to have even more knowledge.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And then she shares some of that knowledge with the company. She says, you're at a critical juncture in the quest, or as everyone is hearing Kate Blanchett saying
I know. I had to do that in not that line, not that delivery.
That's one of those deliveries that just cuts through the text.
Yeah.
Just it's just
no pun intended, but it's a very iconic interpretation.
Yeah, it is. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean it's one of those that even if you can read the rest of the text in some other voice.
That's a hard one.
That one just comes right out at you.
Yeah. Mostly because it was so well done. Yeah.
It was brilliantly done. Yeah. But the quest is at this critical juncture, this edge of a knife.
Mm-hmm.
And yet hope does exist if all are true.
That's right. And there's a condition to that.
Yeah.
If all are true.
If all are true. And then there's this very piercing look that she gives to each member of the company.
Yeah, this interrogation. Really.
It is. It's Osanwe interrogation, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. And remember that quote from our sidebar, right? She had a marvelous gift of insight into the minds of others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But she judged them with mercy and understanding, right?
That's true. Yeah, she did.
Yeah. Only Legolas and Aragorn can actually endure this.
Not a surprise.
Poor Sam.
No, I know.
He just blushes.
We'll get more on that later in the next episode, won't we?
I think Sam is he's kind of like, girl, he doesn't.
Tall girl, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I mean, he could barely handle Rosie. What's he going to do with Galadriel?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. But, you're right. It does make sense. Legolas is an elf, so no surprise that he should be able to endure it. And Aragorn knows her. He's practically family. He's engaged to her granddaughter.
Mm-hmm.
So he is family, really.
Yeah. He's plighted his troth. So then she releases them to rest. And I love this line, do not let your hearts be troubled. I have to say that's, I think, Tolkien very much echoing scripture. But then they're exhausted from this mental interrogation, aren't they? We talked about this. Let's talk about that, the Osanwe idea of this.
Yeah, well, if I can go back to my other favorite linguistic journal, Vinyar Tengwar number 39, where the
Osanwe El Delambaron and Vinyar Tengwar, man. What am I going to do with you, Sean?
The deep cuts, man. It's the deep cuts.
Yeah, that's what makes this great.
But no, I mean, remember what we discussed from the Osanwe Kenta essay, and I think this goes back to episode 139. We learned that nothing can penetrate the barrier of unwill.
Right.
But the natural state of a mind that is not otherwise engaged is to be open, and that the host might not seek to impart knowledge, but the guest might still gain knowledge in inspecting the host.
Yeah, I remember that.
So, yeah, it's like you can shut somebody out, but the
default state. Yeah.
Right.
They set up the router and the default password is password.
Right.
And if you don't change that default password, anybody can get in and hack your network.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so even if you don't intentionally transmit knowledge while somebody's digging around in your head, they can still gain knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. So. Especially if they're like a P12. I understand Cyclops can do that. Yeah. You knew we had to make a Bester reference, right?
Yeah.
Yes, he was. Yeah. All right. And then Celeborn wraps this up. You're going to be safe here, even if this didn't concern us, which, by the way, it definitely does, right? I mean, you can kind of hear that little sidebar from him, but he does say, rest. And it's interesting. He says, we're not going to talk about this for a while. Later on, we're going to learn that a full month goes by before they even consider their road forward. Granted, the company themselves, the passage of time feels very different to them, but it is a full calendar month before they even talk about that. Yeah. And Hammond and Skull point out some things in Tolkien's timeline that suggest why Galadriel and Celeborn kept them there for so long. In the manuscripts at Marquette, we learn that Celeborn and Galadriel send out messengers to Elrond. Well, there you go. That actually probably shoots down our Osanway thing almost altogether. And seek for news of Gandalf.
Good point.
And then Galadriel orders the eagles to watch as well. So
much for me trying to cling to some degree of Osanway here. Oh, well.
Yeah, that kind of shuts the door, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Should have looked ahead in the notes.
Always. Well, and now you shall rest, listeners. Maybe not quite yet, and we're not going to wait a month to speak of your further road, but we do have Bartleman's Bag coming your way in a minute, and when that's done, well, the talk continues all night long at the Prancing Pony.
All night long. All night.
Oh, no. Not going to let you sing, Sean. Not going to let it happen.
There'll be no singing here.
No singing here. No.
No, it's back to what you were saying. Yes, that is right. We have always got lots of discussion happening in our social media spaces. At our common room on Facebook, you're going to find comments, questions, corrections, and more on every episode, as well as updates from us throughout the week. Just look for the Prancing Pony Podcast on Facebook and click the like and follow buttons.
And now we have another common room on Reddit. You can find great discussions there at r/PrancingPonyPod. And as always, you can find us on Twitter and on Instagram with the handle @PrancingPonyPod. So follow us wherever you happen to be. And if you like us, please share us on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, wherever you can find Tolkien fans.
And if you really want to let the world know your feelings about us, give us a review on Apple Podcasts. The more reviews we have, the more visible our podcast is, which helps others find us and this great community of Tolkien fans we built together.
And finally, if you'd like access to exclusive content like postscripts, quarterly specials, PPP swag, and more, like hanging out and listening to an episode be recorded live, check out patreon.com/prancingponypod to find out how you can join the fellowship of the podcast. Now, I think it's time to see what old Bartleman has in the mailbag for us tonight. Sean, we have a quick one?
Okay, I think we've got a pretty short one here.
Good.
Jomaine in Singapore wrote to us with a question about a pretty recent episode. I have a question about the chapter on Lothlórien. Just before the company reaches the eaves of Lothlórien, Frodo thought that he heard something, which is none other than our dear friend Gollum. Gimli asks Frodo what it was, why he had turned swiftly around, and Frodo mentions that he thought he heard feet. Gimli then replies that he hears nothing but the night speech of plant and stone. What do you suppose Gimli is referring to? Jomaine says, perhaps I'm too much of a city dweller, but while I can somewhat imagine night speech of plants to the muted rustling of leaves in the evening breeze or something along those lines, I can't imagine what the night speech of stone is. Is Gimli able to hear it because he is a dwarf? Interesting question, Jomaine. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Alan, let's discuss.
Okay. Well, I see a couple of possibilities here. Either this is akin to Legolas when he said of the Noldor in Eregion, the trees and the grass do not now remember them. Only I hear the stones lament them. Deep they delved us, fair they wrought us, high they builded us, but they are gone. That is, some sort of actual connection with the earth, especially being connected with Aule, in which Gimli can hear the thoughts of the plants and stones. That's one possibility. I kind of lean towards the other, which is that it's just a poetic flourish, that the night speech of plant and stone is simply the rustling sound of natural things moving around.
Yeah, I tend to think it's more poetic than anything. I'm thinking, yes, Gimli's a dwarf and dwarves are close to Aule, but even despite that, I don't see that a dwarf would have the same ability to speak to nature in the way that an elf would and sort of understand speech.
Or listen
the way
in
Legolas
to
does.
actual speech.
Yeah. I mean, Legolas says this about the Noldor of Eregion, but in saying that, you see that he can sort of hear the stones speak and the trees speak, and he thinks the Noldor are strange because the stones are remembering them, but still, as an elf, he can sort of understand the stone speech, whatever that means.
Right.
So it doesn't seem to me to really correlate to kinship to Aule because we know that the wood elves don't have that. So I don't think that a dwarf would have the same ability to do what Legolas does in that scene. So I think I'm with you. I think it's really just a poetic flourish. I mean, Tolkien is a philologist, And
Yes.
obviously we know the importance of language in his world and in his writing.
Right.
And I think it's really nice. It's a silly way to say it, but I think it's just a really lovely thing for him to do, to sort of suggest that every sound is a kind of language. And I think that's all he's doing here. It's a kind of language. It's not really a literal language.
No, it's not a language with vocabulary and grammar and actual thoughts and expressions being conveyed.
And I think that's key. It's not only is it not a spoken language, it's not conveying thoughts in the way that what Legolas is talking about with the stones outside of Region. I really do think Gimli is just talking about, the sounds of plants and stones.
Yeah. I mean, it's similar to his whole idea about having the ears of a fox.
Yeah. Now, I guess it does beg the question, what kind of sounds do stones make? Because obviously we can imagine plants making sounds as they blow in the wind. What kind of sounds do stones make? I don't know.
The sound of things scraping, like if the wind is blowing little bits of bark or debris, you might, hear things scraping against the rock of the earth.
The sound of a couple of reeds blowing together might be different than the sound of a plant scraping on a stone or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, you're right. It's not like the wind is going to be picking up actual rocks and flinging them around.
I hope not.
Hopefully the wind isn't
rather
that strong.
dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Maybe it sounds like this.
You've got 2 empty ounces of
coconuts.
coconut and you're banging them together.
Oh, good stuff. Well, that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. It's been a long one tonight, folks, but a good one. Please be sure to join us again next week when Sam sings about fireworks.
He's his own worst critic, I'm sorry to say. But
Yeah, that he is. Now, as always, folks, we want to thank each of you for listening, but we also want to give a very special thank you to our patrons at the Kierdan's contribution tier. To May in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Chad in Texas, Lance in New Jersey, Paul in Colorado, Jerry in Texas, Bruce in California, Mario in Utah, Seth in Texas, Ella in California, Joseph in Texas, and Kathy in North Carolina. Thank you all so very much.
make sure you don't miss a single episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Subscribe to the show through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing as always, don't forget to send your questions, comments, and most of all, your unspoken mental interrogations to Barliman at theprancingponypodcast.com.
Barliman is never, ever, ever punctual with the mail, and
Nope,
we will
not
mentally
anymore.
interrogate him about it.
Yes, we
But
will.
we'll get back to you as soon as we can, and your question or comment may be featured on an upcoming show.
And by upcoming, we mean way far upcoming.
In a few
But yeah.
months, yeah.
Yeah, whenever Barliman gets around to it.
Yeah.
Well, this has been far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.